Kim, go for it.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Great to see you guys. We've got another exciting meeting full of code proposals for you today. And before we get started, I just wanted to note there's a new face from the Lotus team that's going to be helping with meeting notes today. That's Kara. She's the one waving. So thanks, Kara, for being here. And you will see another new face on your screen here, and we'll get to introducing him in just one quick moment. Welcome to our 21st meeting of the Energy Code Board. The objectives of our meeting today are to wrap up proposals for the first draft of our commercial code. I think there's just two key proposals we have left that we would like to vote on with you all. And then we'll switch gears into the residential code and work through our code proposals for those. That's the plan for the day. As that shakes out as far as an agenda, we'll start with the commercial code proposals. We'll work through our residential proposals sort of in order, starting with R402 and hopefully getting through R405. To prepare for this meeting, in case some of these conversations get expedited or go faster than we anticipate, we also have all of the rest of the residential code proposals in this slide deck. So really, we're just going to get as far as we can today, knowing that we only have today and next Thursday to get through all of these great proposals. So that's the plan, and we'll spend the last couple minutes wrapping up and talking about next steps. Reminder, as always, about public comment. Please make sure you are checking the documents for code proposals and public comments. This is going to be especially important as we move into our public comment period, and we'll be giving you guys more reminders about that as we wrap up for the year. Okay, I want to start first with approval of meeting minutes from meeting number 20. Do I have a board motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Also motion.
Thank you, Ron.
Second.
Kevin? All board members in favor of approving meeting minutes from meeting 20, please say aye.
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 Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Any board members against approving meeting minutes from meeting 20, please say nay. Okay, not hearing any. We will, meeting minutes have been approved for meeting 20, and we will get those posted on CEO's website. Alrighty, so exciting today. We have a new board member joining us. This was an appointee of CEO. And so Adam, maybe I'll let you do the honors of introducing our new board member, and then Aaron will turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks, Kim. So everybody, Aaron Esselink is joining us on the board to fill the vacant utility representative seat that Rob Buchanan, his former colleague, actually filled before this. So turn it over to Aaron to briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, yes, I'm Aaron Esselink from Xcel Energy. I'm a product manager, and I currently manage the business new construction products here at Xcel Energy, which include the Energy Design Assistance Program, the Energy Efficient Buildings, and then our Codes and Standards program that I co-managed with Rob Buchanan, being the commercial manager of that program.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Great to have you. We're excited that you volunteered to join us. So thanks for jumping in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to jump right into code proposals. Elizabeth should be joining us late, and so her proposal was first on our docket this morning, and so I'm going to skip through her proposal. You all should have seen it, but just so she can be here to kind of explain her rationale. And we will start instead with our proposals for commercial section C503. So just a quick note before I turn it over to Tim. So we had two proposals for C503. They were basically, one was to strike the section. If we don't want to strike it, there's a proposed amendment to it. And Tim, I'll let you speak to if that's still the format you'd like the board to vote on. And then the second thing I wanted to note is that the same proposals, Tim submitted the same proposals on the residential section, R503, really with pretty much the exact same edits. And so to help expedite our conversation and again, make sure we get through all our board proposals in this meeting and our next one, we decided to kind of bucket these together so we could have the conversation about rationale all at once. So we're going to start with C503. Tim, I'll turn it over to you to share your proposal, and we'll vote on C503, and then we will do the same with R503. So that's the
Perfect.
plan.
Thank you,
All right,
Kim.
Tim, over to you.
All right, good deal. Good morning, everybody. So these two together, well, we'll start out with C503, but as Kim said, it's a matching proposal, same issue in the R portion, residential portion. So I think I might have brought this up previously, but I don't recall. I've got so many energy code meetings, I'm losing track. So, but with that being said, with the new definition of substantial improvements, it relies on the 50% of the market value. And I put some information into my reason statement that it'll rarely, if ever, get to that point, either on residential or commercial. Examples would be, a basement finish, in a house, in Boulder County, where I live. I don't work in Broke, but I live. You got $1.5 million homes. You'd have to get a basement finish for $750,000 because the appraised value is figuring land and improvements on land, the way the assessors all work. So my suggestion would be to, I think we need to keep the possibility of, kicking in those extra requirements. So instead of deleting the whole exception, then you would need to just modify the language and maybe say 50% of the gross floor area of the tenant or the tenant space. So I hope that made sense, and I'm open for any questions or comments.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I have the language, the proposed revision language on the screen, so hopefully that looks good. And Kevin, I see your hand up, so I'll jump over to you.
I'm just curious, Tim, what led you to the 50% of floor area versus a different percentage of valuation?
Well, we could do something with valuation. I guess maybe what would that look like from a valuation standpoint, in reference to what, I guess, 50% valuation of what?
Yeah, I mean, if the base exception writes it at 50%, I think you make it at 25%. I guess my only, when I first looked at this, I thought that not all square footage is created equally, if you will. And especially since we've gone and thrown in our area reference point as above base plane. I feel like, an unfinished basement then could kind of artificially jump up that number, the threshold for which it's required.
Tim, do you have a thought to that? Otherwise I can
I can weigh in on this one if,
yeah, sure, Carolyn,
if it's helpful, because first I just want to say I'm very much in support of Tim and really appreciate him for bringing this forward, because I had missed this nuance here. And we ran into this issue at Boulder years ago and got rid of the percent of assessed value. And it's well, Tim used the example of the $1 million homes. We also found the inverse to be true, particularly in the commercial sector with very old buildings, that every project was exceeding 50% of the assessed value on those projects when you couple in construction costs in our area. And so the assessed value is just a really challenging thing in our market to use for both reasons. And so we moved to the 50% of gross floor area. We added a component to it around fenestrations or changes to walls as an additional trigger to move it into that substantial category. I think there's another example out there that's total value of the project, so like a fixed dollar amount of the project that I think is on the table as well. But I definitely advocate to move away from the assessed value metric.
Thank you, Carolyn. Adam, you had your hand raised. Did you want to add anything?
Well, all I was just going to do is point out the comment that Hope shared, which is that the 50% of floor area matches the IEBC. Just wanted to flag that in relation to Kevin's question of where that 50% came from.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so maybe back to Kevin's idea, what would that language look like? So I'm not real clear if you're doing it on valuation, 50% of the valuation of what? So we get a permit application in, say for basement finish, total valuation. Well, we're going to talk commercial here. So a tenant finish base, and it's like $500,000 for the full fit out of a floor plate. And so what would 50%, what would that be compared to? I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I was just going to offer, even with Kevin's example on the residential side, I don't think I've ever seen a basement that's exactly 50%
Sure.
of the gross floor area. They're usually always slightly less. And so in and of itself, basement finish, we haven't found it to trigger this. And so again, I think that's why the 50% felt like a good threshold. Certainly willing to entertain other components of the alteration that elevate it to the substantial category. Like I said, we use things like altering dimensions of interior spaces, meaning moving walls or adding walls or modification to fenestration. That's what we historically used for Boulder.
So given that, Hope's point about the 50% being consistent with code and that we've got a real live test case of it going in Boulder, maybe that floor area, that 50% of floor area makes more sense to me. Yeah, live with that.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, Ron, I see you. Do you have a thought?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I like the idea of the 50% of floor area, but I think it's true that because we've defined floor area in a narrower sense than I had been thinking of it previously, it really does complicate things. And I guess I wonder if maybe we need to reference that above grade area number as part of this. So 50% of the area of the above grade. I don't know. I wonder if we can meld those two together so we're talking apples to apples more accurately.
So I know I see Andrew's hand up, but just one comment. So maybe let's just talk commercial C503, where the situations we have all the time are the tenant finishes. And you have a multi-story office building and we do a tenant finish, maybe a full floor plate. I think I used that in an example. Even on the assessed value, you're never going to hit this, getting into the adding some points. But if you do, per the building or the tenant space is that language, so I'm not even sure if that's going to work well. Because if the tenant space is defined, then it's say a full floor plate and they do a full demo and then come back with a new tenant, which I see often, then I guess that's when that would come into play. And I'm struggling with this, with trying to come up with an option to keep it in to go to this instead of just deleting the whole thing because of a bad definition. So that's my struggle with how to make that language work on the commercial side, and then we could maybe segue into the residential. Thanks. I'll listen for more comments.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, Andrew. Go to you.
My comment's more limited to the commercial. That the 50% in part seems to bring in the tenant finish concept too, which typically does that not go off the net versus the gross? And if one were to consider net in lieu of gross, how might that work? That's more of a question. Because for the commercial, feels like a net may be more appropriate, particularly when one's looking at TIs.
That's a good question, Andrew. I don't know, Tim or Hope, do you all have any kind of thoughts in response to that?
Yeah, I think, that could go, I'd be supportive of the net. I mean, it's, be it, either way is going to work. I'm not sure if it still answers my question I just brought up of when it's really going to apply, or if it's really in the bigger office buildings, if it's ever going to comply, or very rarely.
Yeah, Anna.
I think there needs to be a little bit of discussion around just how this language works. So if I was working on a project that was going to be a tenant finish in a office building, and I read impact 50% or more of the gross or net floor area of the building or the tenant space, I think I would have questions about how that language applies, right? Can I use the whole building square footage even though I'm only 1/5 of it? Or do I just have to use my tenant's square footage? So I think there just needs to be, and I know that I'm kind of muddying the waters a little bit more, but I think there just needs to be a little bit more discussion around how this is actually put into practice and how you would expect people to, do you want them to use the gross floor area of the building? Or is it the tenant space that they are working on?
Thank you, Anna. I think it's an important consideration. Carolyn, I will go over to you. I see you dropped a comment in the chat as well. That might be helpful.
Yeah, for folks who are listening, I just added to the chat so it's easier to read the provisions that were in our 2020 code. And we did the building area, and again, in our definition, it was above and below grade for building area for the purposes of this definition. And so just showing the additional characteristics that we applied that would put it into this category of substantial, where you have to go above and beyond simply meeting the base code requirements. Right, and so that was like substantial replacement of mechanical lighting systems. Again, as I mentioned, wall changes, fenestration replacement. So I don't think the intent here is that simply because even if the tenant space is 80% of the building, if all they're doing is building out a tenant space and they're not modifying the major building systems in that process, I don't think we should be requiring them to earn additional efficiency credits. I think we want them to earn additional efficiency credits if they're modifying what is the real performance of the building in a substantial way. So I advocate, I think the 50% of area above and below grade, irrespective, but I would advocate layering in the additional changes that trigger this. So major system modification or envelope modification. Just to get, I mean, again, for this clarity, like we don't necessarily want to, if all you're doing is finishing out the walls, interior to a tenant space, adding some small appliances or things like that, that's not the thing that should trigger the additional efficiency credits. It's really if you're modifying what was the original structure of the building and it's the original building's performance.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm going to try to merge your language together. And Tim, I would love to turn over to you, make sure that you agree with that, the direction that Carolyn would like to take this.
Thanks for putting that up, Hope. I think leaving the gross would be in there, but after mulling this over and listening to comments, I'm thinking that getting rid of the building, because an alteration is a tenant finish. We're talking commercial now. Well, same thing on residential, but in particular with commercial. So an alteration, in the IEBC, it's an alteration inside an existing building. And same thing with the energy code, they tie together. So with that, we're really talking about the tenant finish alteration permit. So we should, in my opinion, change that and just say 50% of the gross floor area or net. I'd go with gross now. It doesn't really matter. The floor area of the tenant finish. So that if you're doing, an example would be that a full floor plate on a 10-story building, then and they've demoed out, then that's going to hit this and get you into this section to get the additional. I think that's along the lines of what my thought process was, to hopefully salvage this section, because I think it's important to keep it in to, get to some threshold to get those energy additional.
And Tim, thank you for that. And do you want to keep the sort of additional language from Carolyn related to sort of this piece, the mechanical lighting, this additional language, and then this additional definition that would go with it?
That would make sense. I can kind of see how it all ties together. Can you blow that up? I can't.
Sorry, yeah, I was in editing mode, so let me see if I can.
Okay.
Is that, give me one second. Is that easier to read?
Yep.
Okay. Carolyn, while Tim's reading, did you want to share?
Yeah, I have a clarification for Tim. So using this scenario, so I have one tenant space that's 10% of the total floor area of a building. This would mean that if they're modifying 5% of the total floor area of the building, it would trigger it. And I just want to make sure that that's what your intent was.
I'm sorry.
So the tenant space is a small percentage of the building. 50% of the tenant space makes it an even smaller percentage of the building. And then you would trigger that they have to earn additional efficiency. And so I just want to make sure that that was your intent.
Well, okay. My intent would be just looking at the square footage only of the tenant finish, of where the tenant finish alteration is happening. So the perimeter of that tenant space, unit 10, space 101 or whatever that might be. And so that's got a perimeter of that suite space, 10,000 square feet. And if they go in and they modify more than 5,000 square feet of that space, and then that gets, to the point of the plan checker trying to decide, they're doing minor modifications throughout new floor covering. And usually that's encompassed into the permit, even though a lot of that doesn't even need a permit, but it's just part of the overall permit. But it's moving, taking down walls, moving around stuff. So it's going to be a gray area getting into, of course, the AHJ. So it's more the perimeter of the tenant space is what I'm thinking is really what this intent should be, or is, or could be, I guess.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then just on feedback for Kim, we can't just say of the tenant finish, because you can have a building that doesn't have tenants.
Okay.
So it needs to be the gross floor area or individual tenant finish or tenant finish, something like that. It needs to be inclusive of a single owner occupant building.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn, for flagging that. Anna and Hope, I'd love your guys' thoughts. Anna, I'll go to you first and then Hope.
I just wanted to note that the way that this reads to me right now is that if we are impacting 50% of the gross floor area of the individual tenant finish, and mechanical and lighting systems are substantially replaced, and we're doing substantial structural alteration, we need to do the additional credits. Is that your intent?
think those should be ors?
I think they need to be ands, just to be clear.
Okay.
I was intending them to be ands. Again, this is not just, you don't just have to meet the code requirements. You have to go above and beyond the code requirements. Meaning you're gonna have to do additional things because you're making this modification. Right, so that's what this is triggering.
Just to give an example of a school that I worked on recently, if this school just replaced all of their HVAC and all of their lighting, there were no structural upgrades, and they replaced everything. I mean, gut. They would not have to provide the additional credits. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think in that case, right, you're improving the HVAC equipment because you're taking out what was there and you're putting in something that's compliant with the code. So they're already doing what I would see as expect to see as a major energy efficiency improvement with that project as is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So to have one energy
they're affecting
efficient,
100. Yeah, they're technically affecting 100% of the floor area in that scenario.
Hope, what do you? And then we'll roll through the rest of the hands here.
Yeah, see now, I'll say how I interpreted this is because you have it 50% of the gross floor area or individual tenant space, and then you have mechanical lighting systems or substantially replaced or are substantially replaced. And I read it as or so if you did something with mechanical or you did something with lighting. And I caution you from being a little overzealous on this because there's some things to keep in mind. One is we don't want people to not replace mechanical equipment that they could get more efficient equipment thinking it's going to trigger additional efficiency requirements if they're going to replace some of this. So keep a little bit of that in mind. And remember that in some instances, what little, it may be 50% of whether we go gross or net of the floor area that's being done, there may not be an ability for most projects, quite honestly, when it comes to tenant finishes, to incorporate those additional efficiency options that are currently listed. So again, I mean, Anna brings up a good point. I see it as the opposite. How this is written is not very usable or enforceable right now.
And I will just note, I am not trying to claim that what I did live here is the right code language. So Anna, Hope, Carol, if you guys have recommendations on how to continue to refine this, please drop those in the chat or share those so we can continue to workshop this. Andrew, I'll go to you, and then Elizabeth.
I'm concerned in part that somebody who's a tenant is going to trigger a dispute between the tenant and the building owner, and the impact of the affected area, that I assume there would be some savings clause or exception that with respect to the TI, that it would only be affecting the TI area and not necessarily trigger duties or obligations to other areas of the building, unless that is the intent. And if that is the intent, I feel for a tenant trying to lease a portion of a building as to what that may cause to a building owner. And I don't see how that's addressed here.
Tim, did you
flagging? I did put a change in the chat.
I saw that. Thanks, Carolyn. I was going to get through the comments and then work through that one. And I mean, Carolyn, do you think that addresses Andrew's concern? Your change there?
No, I mean, I think that there's confusion about, like, if this project is already changing material components of the building envelope, I don't see that there's a conflict with building owner tenant, right? The tenant's project is already modifying building systems, building envelope. So they're already empowered through the building owner to have to make those changes as part of the project. So I don't see the conflict there, but I understand that as currently written, to the earlier comment, it's not reading right. for what I had intended the change to be.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, I'm gonna go to Elizabeth, and then I want to note Kevin's comment in the chat, wondering if we should table this and kind of try to craft some code language, working with Hope and Anna offline to make sure that this is dialed and meets the intent. But Elizabeth, you haven't had a chance to share your thoughts here, so I'd love to hear
Oh,
yours.
sure. I want to apologize to the board for being late. We had a family emergency this morning, so very sorry about that. And sorry, I'm coming in a little late. I will say, just reading this, I'm having difficulty understanding what type of instances we're trying to capture by this. Carolyn, I don't know if you could give an example of the sort of thing that you feel is not currently addressed by the code that needs this extra language.
No, so the point, what started this conversation, Elizabeth, just to bring you up to speed, is the original language talks about assessed value. And Tim had flagged that in our market, assessed value is a problematic metric. You're either never going to reach it or you're always going to reach it, depending on what you're talking about. And so the proposal here is to revise the definition of substantial, where substantial is enough to trigger requirements for additional efficiency. So, and so then, my argument is just modifying 50% of the floor area in and of itself shouldn't necessarily require projects to have to go above and beyond simply meeting the base code requirements. And so we're trying to get at a point where there's a substantial enough modification to the building that warrants them to have to further improve the building through additional efficiency points. So that's the intent here. So I'll give you one, just prime example. So we had a lot of like marijuana cultivation facilities go into strip malls. For those to go into the strip mall, they're modifying what is an existing tenant space and adding substantial mechanical systems to it and moving walls and things like that. So that's where we want to make sure that there's sufficient additional credits. Or the tenant space is the bulk of the building, and as a result of this new tenant finish, like there's a medical clinic going in and they also have to do a lot of work, right? That's the thing, like it's effectively making it a largely new structure, and we need to bring it up and elevate it just a little bit. That's the intent.
Thank you. That's helpful. I see some comments here about maybe tabling this with some refinement. I think we'd want to compare what is not currently captured by a project, like your examples there, that would be a change of use. And the change of use would basically kick things into the new construction code requirements. So what type of projects are getting missed by this? I guess I'm still not totally clear on that, but I'm in agreement that maybe we can workshop this a little bit more. Okay. I see the intent though, and I agree that you're right. Something needs to be done. Thanks, okay, everybody.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So Tim, maybe I'll turn it back to you to offer up if you feel comfortable tabling this, and we can work together offline to dial this in and bring it back to the board.
Yes.
Okay.
I would propose to table, well, it would be both. I think the residential side is going to be a lot easier discussion than the commercial. I knew that was going to be the case. And yeah, I think lots of good comments. And I like Hope's comment, writing code on the fly never has worked in our history. So to see some good, concise language, put some stuff together, then we can bring that back. And I think Andrew made a comment. I'm already dealing with the electric ready requirements going on first-time tenant finishes in shell buildings, with the impact of the tenant not having any idea they got to pay extra money on their lease, and the owners don't cover that. So, but that's just going to be what you deal with the electric ready code as you start enforcing it, and this code, of course. Thanks, but yep, let's table.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And I just want to note, so Tim, Hope, Anna, we have a quick 3 days before our next meeting. So while we are not going to write code language on the fly today, we will be writing it on the fly in the next 3 days. So just a heads up that Adam, you and I can coordinate and get emails out to folks right away after this meeting to start to think about how to refine this language. Okay, well, great conversation. I appreciate you guys digging into that one. And before we move on to residential, I'm gonna go back into slideshow mode. Elizabeth, we had skipped over your initial proposal for C406. This is where we were gonna start, and then we wanted to make sure you were here. So I will pass it over to Elizabeth for our final commercial proposal before we switch gears to residential.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So there's the section here in C406 here that is differentiating our requirements between buildings with heat pumps and buildings without heat pumps. What I'm suggesting here is that we simplify this language to say non-electric buildings, and then we define what that means rather than buildings without heat pumps. Partly because the metrics around what does it mean to have a building with heat pump is really complicated. And I worry that it's just going to be so complicated that people are not going to try to achieve it. I also, while I agree with the intent that yes, of course, we all want buildings with heat pumps, I don't think it's possible to comply with the code without having heat pumps with some extent. So my suggestion here is just to simplify the language to be, basically electric buildings and non-electric buildings, to have it have an easier time categorizing things. So my language here is just taking out all the complexities about what is defining heat pumps and capacity and heat pumps and this and that, because I think the code is just going to make that work out without all of this extra language. If you look at the C406 credits or any of the performance paths, I don't think we could be in compliance without using heat pumps. So I don't know that we have to restrict the definition in the way that we are, and we could just make this easier for people. And I think we'll achieve the same effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hope, I will go to you first.
Okay, thank you so much. I understand what Elizabeth is trying to do, but I'll let you know how code officials will interpret this. You say non-electric buildings. It's not a electric utilizing building for their heating and all of that, or an electrification building. I can't think of the word. Sorry, it's crazy right at the moment. They're going to look at it as a building that does not have any electricity at all being in there. It's like a utility building, and that is how code officials will interpret this, because that's already part of what like a non-electric building is utilized, and concepts are utilized as a utility building through the other codes. That's what they're going to gravitate to, not thinking about electrification at all. So just
so
FYI.
Perhaps we could change the title, but I think you see the intent here with the definition is that the condition area that use purchased energy that is not electricity for space heating or surface water heating. So if we have a better way to title that credit, I'm all for it.
Yeah, because you say non-electric, and they think of the utility building. They aren't going to read the rest of the information because it doesn't trigger in their brain that it's a section that would be required. They'll move on. So it'll never get
Would it
captured.
be better to say mixed fuel buildings?
I think mixed fuel will get your intentions across better. Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
I'm all for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Hope. Adam?
I was just going to also offer we could use buildings with combustion equipment, because we use the phrase combustion equipment is defined. We use it in other contexts. So that was just another offer, but I think mixed fuel also works. So either way.
I was trying to stick with the board's original intent, which was not around combustion equipment in general. It was specifically about space heating and service water heating.
Sure. Okay.
But we could use, I was trying to stick with the non-electric, purchased energy that is not electricity.
How about
I think you get what I'm going for here.
Yeah.
Semantics.
I think mixed fuel buildings at least gets to Hope's point of like, it'll make them look at it now. They'll actually read the language below the title and see that we're talking about things that use or don't use electricity for space heating and water heating. So
Yeah,
think
that
that's
makes total sense to me. Thanks, Hope.
Thanks, guys. Anna?
I just want to point out that our experience has been that in colder climate zones, I'm thinking like 6B7, getting building owners to go to heat pumps, the best way that I have been able to get them to do that is to allow them to have natural gas backup heating when their heat pumps cannot operate. And my concern here is that going to be that those building owners, I will not be able to convince them to utilize heat pumps as their primary source of heating because they would have to use electric backup heating, which is going to obviously drive up their peaks and their utility costs, especially if it's a 24/7 building. School districts that I've worked in that are in colder climates have been really tricky to get them to utilize heat pumps. And the only way that I've been able to successfully do that is by allowing them to do natural gas backup. So just a concern that I think we might be alienating some of those colder climates and not encouraging them to utilize heat pumps if we are not allowing any sort of backup natural gas heating.
Thanks, Anna. I guess trying to marry both of the intent behind this proposal and that experience that you just shared, Anna, would there be a way to capture that in an exception? Or is it all of the language that would be needed, in your opinion?
It's up to the board, however you all want to handle it. And if you do want to include that as an exception, the way that you could do it is by saying, I'd have to read through. Let me pull up the
Oh,
exception.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Just keep it in edit mode.
Kind of an exception would be natural gas heating solely used for supplemental heating, something like that.
I think that's a really good idea. I would
How
support
would
that.
you-
Okay.
How would you assure that supplemental heating doesn't turn into primary heating?
Supplemental heating is defined earlier in the code. I'll pull it up. Go ahead,
I mean,
Hope.
I know it's defined, but do you think that that definition is sufficient to assure that someone who has natural gas heating on site is not actually using it?
I think we could add the wording around supplemental heating because there are some specific control requirements around it. We should double check that definition isn't just about electric resistance and that it is generic to, supplemental heating.
And you
One
can't
idea would
build code language to what could potentially happen once the building is built type of situation. The intention, there would really be no way of, like, we can't go back and say, we see that you're using that gas, for your primary and using the heat pump as your backup. We can't build a code or enforce something for the what ifs.
And I will just note too that the board already did agree to language in the supplemental heating section for heat pumps, that it must be like have the controls, not just for electric resistance backup, but for resistance or gas or whatever the backup source is.
Great, thanks, Adam.
The board already agreed to that. So we could just say fuel gas backup that complies with whatever that section number is or something like that.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. My goal here was to have people avoid having to do the calculation of 50% of the load, blah, 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 because when you're deciding your system types, you don't know what that is. Like you would not be able to do that math when you're making decisions. So my goal is to try to encourage more heat pump usage by making it easier to say, oh, sure, yeah, we could qualify for that.
So Elizabeth and Anna and Adam, can you someone repeat the language in the exception? I missed it earlier and I want to make sure I'm capturing on this slide before we move anything to a vote.
I would say something along the lines of fuel gas supplementary space heating or whatever that complies with, and I'll have to look up the section number.
C 403.4.1.1.
You're gonna have to do that one more time, Anna.
Sorry. C 403.4.1.1.
Okay.
I would say space or service water heating.
Okay. Okay. Good workshopping, everybody. Okay, any other board comments, questions, thoughts on this proposal?
Just for visual, can you make that red, please? Because that is a change.
Oh, yes, good eye, Adam. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I think that gets to the intent. Basically, I was trying to just eliminate the need to have too many calculations done early enough that people could still, say, oh, sure, we can meet this credit. Yeah, we want to do heat pumps.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, Tim, did you have a thought?
No, I was going to ask to blow it up, but I can read it. Never mind. I'm good. Thanks.
Sorry, Tim. My computer is not happy with me going in and out of presentation mode. It's going very slowly, so but hopefully you can read that a bit better now.
So can we just review the first slide that shows the actual changes to the section language? So we're still fine. Everything in that language would still be fine with that additional exception, just confirming. I think it would, but I'm just making sure that, Elizabeth, you agree.
So you're saying what's stricken wouldn't be stricken, Adam?
Well, so basically making all the changes that are on this screen would not be affected by the additional exception that we just added. Like these all still work with that exception.
Can you show us the exception again real quick, Kim?
Yep. So
We
there's
might need, we might need just a couple more words there for number 2. Sorry, and I apologize. On the other slide, number 2.
oh no, this one. Got there.
Yeah, buildings that meet any of the following criteria. Fuel gas supplementary space heating in and of itself does not mean you get to kick over into section. I think we need to just say fuel gas supplementary space heating that complies with blah, blah, blah is exempt from counting as mixed fuel, like, because the rest of the building still has to be all electric. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could say buildings that use electricity. You don't even have to specify heat pumps, right? Buildings that use electricity as their primary fuel source for heating and service, space heating and service water heating.
There you go. Yeah.
With fuel gas supplementary.
Yes. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah.
And then does there need to be language at the end that say are exempt, or does, because this is an exception, we're good, right? Okay. Okay.
And buildings should be plural, probably.
Thank you. We can, we
Yeah,
can.
we'll clean the language up, I think. Yeah.
And we can absolutely get this reviewed by our technical code folks to make sure it is written in a way that makes sense. So, okay. Any final thoughts or comments? If not, I think I feel comfortable moving us to a vote. Oh, moving us to a vote on this one. Okay. Not hearing anything. So, I'm going to say, here the requirements to simplify buildings with heat pumps to mixed fuel buildings. No thing there, fuel buildings, and let's just say, and other changes as reflected.
Yeah, thank you. And when you guys are wordsmithing this, if you wouldn't mind just double checking that if we've used that mixed fuel definition anywhere, that that we haven't accidentally created a conflict.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. So I think the intent is there. A vote to accept this proposal is to accept this intent, knowing that our teams will kind of workshop this to make sure that the language makes sense and is most appropriate for what the intention here is. So the straw poll for you all right now is, do you want to modify C406.1.1 reflecting those to reflect the changes that we saw on the slide? A vote for option A is yes. A vote for option no, or excuse me, for option B is no, I do not like the proposal. Vote for option C is to abstain. So board members who would like to vote for option A, please raise your hand. Awesome, great, thanks guys. I see 12 hands raised in support. You can lower your hands. Okay, board members who do not agree with this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 0 hands up for option B. Option C, if anyone would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 0 hands for option C. So that passes the straw poll unanimously. Thanks, everybody. And I'm just going to skip ahead through our 503 slides since we went a little out of order here. Sorry for the scrolling. We will get there soon. There we are. Okay, so now we're going to shift into residential. So everyone take a moment to get commercial out of your brains, put residential code into your brains, and we will just start rolling through these one at a time. So the first one is from Kim, and is for section R402.5.1.1. So Kim, and this was the proposal that I believe was emailed to everybody, that was not in the residential code proposal document, but came through a little later. So hopefully you all had a chance to review this. But Kim, I will pass it over to you to share your proposal.
Okay, actually, this is not the one that was emailed late.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
It's okay.
Been a busy week. So
Yeah.
anyway, everyone should have read this anyway.
When going through the code proposals, I just noticed the suggestion to change the language around what's required for air leakage rate. And it sounded like we didn't actually discuss that and it was just voted on as an attempt to make it more consistent. I see Hope's hand up, so maybe she has an input as to why we might have changed it or wanted to change it. But from my perspective as a HERS rater and what's familiar with the building departments, changing the overall building air leakage over to a per square foot type of requirement versus a volume requirement creates some inequities and less familiarity with what that term means. And when I say inequities, it means that a building with, say, high ceilings and a super high volume would have the same type of requirement as a building of the same size square foot, but that has a more normal height, but has a much more volume to heat, as well as exterior building surface area. So this proposal to change that to a consistent, to a per square foot value was concerning to me.
So I just want to interject that that's not the proposal that was on the screen, Kim. That the one that was on the screen was the one related to your later proposal.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the first one in the PDF. That's what I pulled up.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
The one that's on the screen is the one that was sent later. The one you're talking about. So Kim, maybe we just jump to the next one really quick and then come back.
That's fine. Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
Since we're already talking about it, I just want to make sure because I'm sure there's a lot of like people confused.
A lot of confusion starting with me. I just apologize.
This is the one, and I would note that Andrew also made the same proposal to restore it to ACH 50.
Okay. So sorry, board members. So this is the proposal Kim was speaking to, R402.5.1.3. And yeah, keeping that section in context of ACH 50. So here is that code language, and Kim just confirming on your side that that looks correct.
And I think we should give Andrew, since he proposed the same thing, a chance if he wanted to add any thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, did you did propose the same change? Would you like to share your thoughts on why?
In reviewing this and reviewing the history of this and speaking with many reading professionals, including the NEHB, the LBA, the ResNet leadership and board members, I just fundamentally think the current proposal is inconsistent with the industry, and the industry has gravitated around this, and to modify it would break custom with how the industry has gone and continues to go, and create something that would also create a duty and an obligation for those coding and preparing software to create something for custom for Colorado that doesn't exist and probably doesn't need to exist. So hence, I still think the 24 proposed language is a move forward, and don't think it needs to be modified, and believe it should stay as is.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So I see hands up, and so I'm gonna roll through them. Hope you've got your hand up. Okay, I thought that was for the other one. Okay, Ron, and then we'll go to Brad.
Yeah, this has been a little bit frustrating for many years now. We know that the overall shell leakage area is a better way to measure this. However, the industry has for a long time been working with this air changes per hour, and it's taken a long time before people have started to get used to that. And so we are in a reality where that has started to get across the market in a way that's going to be hard to undo it. I guess I wonder a little bit if we couldn't create an either or situation, so that if somebody has a project where the ACH is leading to the wrong conclusion, that they could use equivalent leakage area as an alternative way to demonstrate compliance, and that would sort of maybe improve the situations for, like, say, really small homes where there feels like there's an inequitable solution. So I wonder if we could create just an either or. But if I was forced to just choose one metric, unfortunately, I think I would recommend we stay with ACH 50, just because that's the market.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. I'll go to Brad, and then if any other board members have thoughts on Ron's kind of proposal to maybe do the either or have ideas on how that could work, I would welcome that. So Brad, over to you. Oh no, Brad, I see your mouth moving and I don't hear any sound.
How about this? There we go.
Yes.
My audio always switches when I go to Zoom back and forth. So this is something that, and support what Ron had said. I think almost up until the point where, he would move or stay with the ACH 50 metric, which I don't 100% disagree with that. But I will say that in the city of Fort Collins, we have included an option to go to the square foot of enclosure area. The other thing is, to address Andrew's comments, most of the raters that work on multifamily buildings are very familiar when they start testing unit to unit testing using that square foot of envelope enclosure area. I can also say that Ecotrope, one of the software packages or applications that is widely used, has now implemented a square foot of enclosure area into their software. So it's true that it's going to be hard to overcome, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think it's not something that's so unfamiliar to the industry that people would be scratching their heads on how to do this. I think more and more people are utilizing it. We implemented it in the city of Fort Collins to kind of remove bias from large buildings and allow people the ability to go with that square foot of envelope or enclosure area on smaller units, smaller townhouse style units, or units that were slab on grade and didn't have additional square foot of basement or crawl space volume. So, and largely it's been successful, and we haven't had any issues. So I would certainly recommend inclusion of it as an option, as Ron had stated. So That's my recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Maybe Kim, yeah, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to? I'll pass it
Yeah,
to
yeah, thank you for the discussion. And I think I'd missed the fact that this was referring to building thermal envelope area versus square footage area of the home. I do think that that area is less well known. It's not what the building permit fees typically are based on. It's pretty easy to calculate if a building is being modeled or an architect is using Revit or some other computer software, but a lot of homes, especially the smaller ones, don't end up being designed with that type of software in mind. So it's more calculations for a requirement from which to then calculate their air leakage area. Yes, and I do confirm too what Brad said about ecotrope. You can quickly switch over between the values of what say 3 ACH 50 means in different language or in different terminology, but it is just less familiar to the industry. And I think they're, at least in my area, just finally understanding what 3 ACH 50 means. So there is a kind of a gap in understanding across the state too, but I'm open to the input. So
thanks, Kim. Andrew, I'll go back to you.
I don't know if anybody has even discussed an example as to what the conversion would mean from the current code. I've been given an example that if a 2,000 square foot dwelling with 9-foot high ceilings, that the proposed rate would change the ACH from 3 down to 1.67. And if true, that would be a substantial change and would in of itself be potentially unachievable in scale. So I don't think this has been well discussed with respect to single family or two family. Now, there may be some usage in multifamily, but I see no appetite from the industry to bring this into the single family until that point in time that the code itself or the consensus committee goes to that for those of us that have to operate in multiple markets.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll go Brad and then Ron. Brad? There you go.
Yeah, a couple points to that, and I'll kind of make something that's always stuck with me over the years, and it's a comment that Joe Stiebert, for those of you that know Joe Stiebert, made. He's kind of one of the people that developed certainly the 3 ACH 50 air tightness testing. This interestingly enough, kind of made an indication that we should be moving to the enclosure area. But his comment was that air doesn't leak from volume, air leaks from the envelope area or the enclosure area. So that's what we should be measuring against. And to Andrew's point, just to kind of to address some of the concerns about tightening it up, I'll tell you on a multifamily building, 0.30 CFM 50 per square foot of enclosure area on a multifamily building often relates to an ACH 50 of about 4 to 4.5. So this 0.22 is probably in alignment with 4 to 5 air changes per hour. So it's not a tightening of the building, it's just a different way to measure it. So, and in most cases, it's either in alignment or in some cases, what I've seen, that 0.30 for multifamily units, it's often higher than 3 ACH 50.
With that, if for instance, if there were an equivalent or alternate, would that be qualified? That no event, even if that measurement were to be used in no event, does it really intend to increase the burden? Because if this were to stick, many of us may have to operate in 2 different measurements to think through it.
Andrew, just to speak to that, I mean that the issue fundamentally is that there isn't a straight perfect one-to-one correlation between these two metrics. You get extremes depending upon the geometry. So if you did this measured, let's say, in a geodesic dome where you have a very efficient building, small building surface area compared to the floor area versus, let's say, a really long spread out single family home with multiple wings, you get wildly different results between these two metrics. And obviously the average geometry, whatever that would be, of the average geometry of residential homes, you might be able to make it equivalent. But the problem fundamentally is that the geometry matters, and these two metrics don't line up 100%, except at a few rare points. So I think that's the basic piece that we're trying to struggle with.
I think you just made my argument as to why I wouldn't impose that upon the residential industry, that if it's an alternate.
Right, and that's why I'm suggesting that maybe the way to bring this better metric into the code is to start by saying either or. You can meet the code, this metric or this metric, and gradually I do think that eventually, I mean, Joe is right, the buildings leak from the envelope, they don't leak from the volume. He's absolutely correct about that. And so which is why I think I like the idea of introducing this alternative metric into the code, so we can maybe gradually over time migrate from one to the other.
Okay, thanks, Ron and Andrew. Kim, turn it over to you. And for Andrew and Kim, would love you guys' thoughts on Ron's proposal to make this an either or. I will not volunteer to make that code language switch right now, but we could volunteer again to vote on that intent, and can come back to you all. So yeah, Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
I really appreciate the discussion on this. I think it's just the proposal kind of caught me off guard, because I didn't remember a discussion around it. It's because we hadn't had one. I saw in Hope put into the chat that the ACH is actually biased to large volume. And now that I'm understanding that it's the building thermal envelope area and that geometric aspect of it, and the more complicated the angles and number of angles, et cetera, that a home is, the more prone it is to having increased building thermal envelope. I can definitely appreciate that. I'm open to the idea of having an either or, but I also think that brings up the, well, which way can we pass type of thing versus just having one number that a building has to comply with and pass. And now that I'm understanding the reasoning for shifting over to the per square foot value, I'm less determined that we need to stick with ACH 50 as well, because people do. I think from my standpoint, there are thoughts of it is for those built homes that do not go through a modeling software that would calculate that building thermal envelope area, and it's not typically always required on plans or something like that, that it would make that test more difficult to have the blower door tester, whoever that might be, make that confirmation.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. We'll go Brad and then Hope. So I'm hearing maybe not the either or approach. And so I think maybe what we'll do is keep just the straight voting of to accept or not accept this proposal, unless I hear another board member advocate for that. So Brad, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, just one last thing to kind of address some of the fears. I mentioned that the Ecotrope has implemented this into their software for PERS ratings. I also feel like I should let people know that TechTite, which is the most commonly used blower door software that almost everybody in the industry is familiar with, has also implemented this square foot of enclosure area into the software. So they can simply just let the software run the testing. Most PERS raters have the ability to easily do that now.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Hope you were up next, if you can hear us.
Yeah, I am so sorry. I don't mean to have a lot of background noise, but unfortunately that's kind of where I'm at. I did just want to, because there was a concern about ensuring that they don't utilize one test and then find they fail that and use the other test and ensuring that there's like some consistency. But I will tell you that the code reads when this was introduced, this concept was introduced in 21. That's why they had the very specific parameters of when you could use this CFM per square foot. And in the 24, how it's advanced, they always try to make things that you have options to, but that those options are as equal as possible. So the 4 air changes per hour or the requirement that's currently listed in there would be comparable to each other. So it's not like they could get away with one over the other. As far as like always trying to implement something that would be a benefit but not energy efficient.
So Hope, I think I caught most of that. It sounds like what Hope was sharing is that the two metrics and the measurements are meant to be equal. Is that correct? Hope.
Yes, that is correct. And what I will say, for the 2 cycles it's been in there and the people that have worked on it, they've tried to ensure that what we're talking about is keeping it compromised. They'll be going back into the then I'll be okay. Sorry, everyone.
No worries. If you want to hold the mic right up to your mouth next time on your headphones, that could help. Yeah, Kim, jump in.
Sorry, not to make this any longer, but I just think that I understood from what Hope was saying of the current language in the code is allowing for the prescriptive option to use ACH 50, and then the other options in which there is modeling involved to have the per square foot language. Is that a correct understanding? No? Sorry.
There's sort of modeling that happens equivalent either way, right? If you're going to do a blower door test, you have to put in inputs into the system to know how to convert the fan speed to any kind of leakage calculation. And so that information is going to be in the software no matter what path you're using. If you're doing a blower door test, in order to make that data useful, you have to put information is about the size of the object that you're testing. And so the software is going to be able to spit out both of these numbers in all cases.
I guess it's a difference though, if you're just using ACH 50, if you can just put in the volume. You're not necessarily putting in all the different building thermal envelope variables.
But in order to calculate the volume, you have to be able to do it. You have to do a takeoff on the structure.
Okay.
And then if you do the takeoff on the structure, in theory, you can produce both of these metrics. I think the question is, are building inspectors and building officials and builders at all familiar with this equivalent leakage area number? And that's the piece of it that I think that where there's an education in the industry. We took it took more than a decade to get people familiar with the concept of ACH, and that's what people are starting to tune into and get comfortable with. And now we're going to ask them to change over to a new thing, which maybe that's right. Maybe it's time to move on. I'm just saying that is going to be a lift that needs to happen if we're going to get people starting to think about air leakage using a different metric. Because right now, a builder, if I just talk to any builder in Boulder County and I say, are you building, are you comfortable building the 3 ACH, or you think you can hit 1? They'll have some idea of what I'm asking about. If I start talking numbers in terms of equivalent leakage area, that I'm starting that conversation back where we had been 10 or 15 years ago.
Yep,
okay, so on that, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Kim. I need to move us along in the interest of time. We have a ton of proposals to get through. So I think we're going to move along to a straw poll here. So if you would like to keep section R402 in context using ACH 50. So if you would like to keep ACH 50 as the metric, your vote is yes on this. If you would like to keep CFM per square foot, your vote here is no. And if you'd like to abstain, your vote is option C. So if you like ACH 50, yes. CFM per square foot, no. Abstain is C. Yeah, Ron?
I was curious, about the idea of trying to put both in there as an either or option. Is that no longer on the table?
I did not hear support from that.
I think that is actually the proposal, though,
Yeah.
is to change it back to the original language that was in the code, which would provide that either or.
So, okay, so the code already provides the either or.
That's what
Well,
I'm now understanding.
It does if you use ERI or simulated building performance. If you're using prescriptive, it just says ACH.
Okay.
So the board could say we want the either or for prescriptive as well, in which case maybe that's an option, maybe a new option C, Kim, is like either or for prescriptive too, or something like that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I just need a little more clarity before I can know how to vote. I recall there being some concern about smaller properties not being able to qualify under the smaller air changes per hour under ACH 50. And there's current exemption language that if you're under 1,500 square foot, you can use this alternate metric. If we vote and say yes here, would that go away for smaller home sizes?
My understanding is no, the exception is still going to be maintained. It's just for any building, any home that wouldn't have fallen under that exception, you still have the either or of the metrics, essentially.
Okay, as long as the exception stays for the under 1,500, I'm fine with it.
Okay, so folks who are
One
advocating,
of you explain Hope's comment in the chat for me.
I hope you're muted.
The one that was saying about the compliance path was because earlier it was talking about res check. And so I was clarifying the res check comment.
Thank you.
Okay, so for those who are advocating for both pathways, do you want to keep the 2024 as is, or do you want to add an option to vote on that would be like 2024 plus a prescriptive option to use either metric? I'm seeing Tim nod. I'm just going to this question feels like it might be different. I'm just going to say want to keep section same or adjust it, and then we will vote on options to adjust. So keep 2024 or this section as written in the 2024 IECC. Oh God. Then we're gonna do keep this section as written in the 2024 IECC plus add an option in prescriptive compliance for use of both metrics. And then the last one is going to be change this section to only allow for CFM per square foot. Did I correctly interpret those options? Seeing nods.
Yes, I believe you did.
Okay, woohoo.
That last question, CFM per square foot. Are you talking?
You tell me, Ron, what was the right
metric? Are you asking about leakage area there?
I'm talking about the change that was being originally suggested. What was this? Cubic feet per minute per square foot? Is that the right metric?
I think the two metrics are CFM 50 versus equivalent leakage area.
Okay, so this would be to allow for equivalent leakage area is the change?
ELA.
Equivalent leakage area.
Yeah.
I'm just going to spell that out.
I think that captures the question.
Leakage. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Thanks, everyone. I know it's a fun challenge to kind of do these proposals live, and so that was a really helpful discussion. Okay, if everyone feels clear on the straw poll, are there any questions before we jump in? Not hearing any, we will go ahead and vote. So board members in favor of option A, which is keeping this section as written in the 2024 ICC, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see one vote for option A. You can lower your hand. If board members would like to keep this section as written and add an option for prescriptive compliance to use both metrics, option B, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 10 hands for option B. Excuse me, 10 hands for option B. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. If any board member would like to vote for option C to change the section to allow only for the equivalent leakage area, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 votes for option C, and option D, if any board members would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay. I see 2 board members abstaining. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. So option B is the winner with 10 votes. And so we'll move forward to including figuring out how to add language into that prescriptive section to allow for both metrics. And that will be our next step for that. Okay, so Kim, I am going to jump back to your proposal that was not included in the residential board proposals doc, but that was emailed to the board here on the slide. And Hope, did you have a thought before we move on? Okay, great. So Kim, over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for that conversation on the other proposal. This one has just come up from working in the industry for so long and trying to verify insulation as it's installed, and in particular in high altitude cold climates. The depth of spray foam or the quality to which bats get installed has a significant impact on the performance of the home. And so as a HERS rater, and for any home that is getting a HERS score or an ERI score, a HERS rater has to go and inspect the insulation. And that's in addition to any inspection that a building official might be required to do or do. The building official is typically looking for they're inspecting insulation to a different level, whereas a HERS rater is inspecting it to make sure that it meets either grade 1, 2, or 3 standards that are described in the ResNet code. And so when we go on site, and if a building's insulation, say a spray foam, is at an average of 4 inches at depth instead of a minimum, then we have to derate that insulation. And so it's actually not performing at the requirements of what is in the code for our values, or an overall U value of a component. And so the proposal here is to really clarify what is being required, and how that insulation, gapping in the word, but the quality to which that insulation is installed, or the minimum depth instead of an average depth, in order to ensure that the home is meeting the minimum required standards that are put forth in the code. Hopefully that makes sense. Essentially, it's just adding a definition to help clarify so that homes do meet that, whether they have a HERS rater going on site or not. And mostly this applies to a prescriptive path compliance where there isn't necessarily a third-party person going on to look at it, because there's no method of accounting in modeling, like for either of the performance paths. There's modeling involved to then say, well, the insulation was only at a grade 2 or a grade 3, and so it gets derated, and so the end up score is accounts for that difference in how the insulation is going to perform. Whereas with a prescriptive path, there's no method of doing that. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's the reason in the background for this proposal.
Thank you, Kim. So welcome board members' thoughts, questions. If you guys can raise your hands. And again, I'm just going to remind everybody to please try to keep your comments and thoughts brief, and just so we can make sure we can get as far as we can today. And Hope, you had a comment on this, so I'm going to pass it to you first.
Thank you so much. So the requirement of it having a grade 1 installation already currently resides within the code. If you go into R303.2, it states you have to install it per the manufacturer's installation instructions. All of our codes have this section in there because there's the installation requirements can change and vary by the type of material, equipment, whatever the case may be. So this has been brought up so many times at the code hearings as far as trying to require the grade 1. They don't want it to be removed from how it's been handled in the past. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is the discussion within the standard itself that's talking about removing the use of grade 1, 2, and 3, that they're going to go to the metric of pass or fail. And so if we have this in there, then we write this code out of it. And because of that, that's why the ICC codes specifically utilize this. So when changes happen in the industry, it doesn't, the code doesn't cause an inadvertent problem with how things are being installed or what's being done, so that there isn't a conflict by how the manufacturer requires it to be done and what was placed within the code. That's why there's a very specifically generalized statement with that. And like I said, it's with all the other codes. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind too, insulation is not installed in the assemblies only for the thermal envelope. Sometimes it is being installed because it's part of a fire resistant rated construction, and they have to install it per the way that it was listed and labeled for that rating. And there's another component that insulation actually comes into play with, is the design and the requirements when it comes to a vapor retarder strategy within the walls themselves. So sometimes they have to incorporate that, which is going to have a different design as to whether it's part of the thermal resistance. And also, when you utilize spray foam in any sort of assembly, there is a requirement that you have an ignition or thermal barrier that is installed. So if you have a foam plastic installed in any sort of assembly, you have to protect it. One of the items that is allowed to be utilized is batt insulation. So that batt insulation that you see in the wall that you might think is horrible, it should be like below what the current standard is of a grade 3. It's not there for thermal resistance. It's there because it's being the ignition or thermal barrier.
Thanks, Hope. I think that's really helpful. Oh no, Anna, anyway, Kim, any follow-up thoughts or any other comments or questions? Given all of that, Kim, are you interested in keeping this proposal in play?
I certainly appreciate Hope's input and perspective. I think it's just challenging knowing that buildings are out there that have been approved to meet code when their thermal envelope from the installation of the insulation that was approved by the building official as meeting the manufacturer's instructions does not meet a high quality installation. And that's, I think, the gap that I was trying to get at here. But if this proposal is going to, potentially create other problems with codes down the road, then maybe there's a different way to address that gap because from what I've seen in manufacturer's instructions don't go into the overall thermal. They don't quite, there's a gap between manufacturer's instructions of this is how you do this, and this is how you do this to actually meet an R value for a code compliance. So just trying to fill that gap. But if this isn't the way to do it, then I totally can appreciate that.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Brad?
I'll make it quick. I'm wondering if we couldn't just add that the requirements of insulation installed to manufacturer's instructions or grade 1 installation in a building thermal envelope, in the building thermal envelope. simple addition of those things might address some of the things that Hope said. And would be open to Kim's thoughts on that.
Just to clarify, Brad, doesn't the first sentence of the paragraph already say that? The components of the building thermal envelope?
Oh, yep. I should have read. Sorry.
And it also resides in R 303, 303.2, stating that it has to be installed to the manufacturer's installation instructions. When you have multiple sections that are saying the same thing, you have a very strong chance of a divergence, and you create a potential conflict between the two sections. And it's a nightmare when that ever does happen. Tim can attest to that.
Definitely struggling as to which section and where this proposal might belong best. So.
Ron, I saw you came off mute. Did you have a thought to share?
I was just thinking that in Boulder County, we did add a statement that said all installation has to be grade 1. And while it does, I think Hope is correct that it does, you can get there by pointing your way through the code and manufacturer's instructions. We put it in there just to be plain as day, make it really clear for anyone pulling a permit that all installation that's used, and obviously we don't enforce that if it's an interior wall and it's for soundproofing or for some other purpose. But it was just, we had too many places on site where there was confusion or questions or lack of clarity. So we added a statement for that purpose, just to make it crystal clear for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So I really do want to try to get us at least through one more proposal today. So I'm going to ask Kim that you kind of think about how you'd like to adjust this proposal, if you do want to adjust it. Otherwise, we can vote on it as is and work with Hope offline to kind of adjust as needed. But I want to get through the final thoughts here. So Tim, you kind of raised and lowered your hand a few times. Did you have a thought to share?
No, we in Broomfield, I don't have an amendment to require the one, but we have been requiring that unofficially, I guess, since I can do that, for both performance and prescriptive. It wouldn't hurt my feelings to see that, but I think Hope's brought up some good comments about putting code language in and potentially having issues later. So it's probably not a good idea to put that in.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Andrew. Oh, sorry, Kim, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I just kind of wanted to ask, Tim, you've been kind of informally enforcing that. Ron, you've put it into code. Have either of you had any issues with that, having it be in there?
Nope.
I have not. It's been nothing but good.
I agree. And part of it is that there's a lot of stuff in the various codes that say you got to follow manufacturer's instructions. I've run into this with roofing all the time. And, having a particular code section to go to has helped my team. So if this was in there, it would certainly be easier. And I think Ron can attest that if you can just point to a code section instead of a manufacturer's instructions that the insulation contractors probably have never seen.
Okay, thanks, guys. Andrew.
Thank you. Just briefly, I lean more towards where Hope is and prefer not to see it in here. It's almost implying that a grade 2 in of itself, which I think is defined as minimal imperfections, and it's further defined, and I'm not necessarily espousing grade 2, but grade 2 in of itself would be desired by many if they could consistently achieve grade 2. And again, I'm not necessarily espousing that, but to put grade 1 as a prescriptive blanket yes, no, I think is just inconsistent with the intent, even if it is already inferable from the definition of install in accordance with manufacturer's recommendations. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, Kim, so I'm going to ask for your final thoughts here. What if you would like to adjust this language at all, or if we want to vote kind of as is, and we can work offline, obviously, to make sure it's good code language if there are conflicts or other issues that arise. This gets added.
I guess I'm just looking at Hope's different things in the chat about not saying resonant, since resonant is going to change how they're the language that they're using. I'm wondering if, just instead of saying the grade, like using grade as a definition, if we would want to insert the actual language for what that means to get away from using grade 1 in case that terminology goes away and then the reference isn't applicable.
We can also, I mean, and I guess Hope, tell me if this doesn't work, but we can also reference a specific edition of the standard, which would have the grade definitions in it. So if you do Standard 301 2022 edition, it will continue to have the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, even if ResNet changes it for future editions. Is that not right?
Yeah, you can. You would have to go in and change the references.
So we could just say ICC or ANSI ResNet ICC 301 2022, and then you would have the grade 1 referenced there consistently.
Okay, I guess I'd like to change that language then in this proposal and then keep the rest of it as is, just for simplification.
Okay, that was the easiest text edit we've had to make today. Okay, thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. Good discussion. Andrew, final comments before we vote.
Yeah, with that, at least under the ResNet standard, and without bringing in Energy Store, is anyone aware of grade 1 versus grade 2 actually being in code language elsewhere, other than a couple local jurisdictions?
Well, I mean, I sometimes see grade 2 ratings in existing buildings where they're rating, and that's where ResNet and the HERS rating started. It was in existing buildings, and sometimes you're trying to quantify the energy performance of something that's already there, and it's not grade 1, it's something else.
But in that, the grade 2 and grade 1 is it differentiated in the rating of the home and may affect the rating or the HERS index. But that's still a voluntary path, not a mandatory path. And the more of this voluntary scoring or the ResNet standard that comes in as a mandatory, it's really whittling away at the prescriptive approach, which really I don't think was intended to have the HERS rater in every instance to achieve a prescriptive approach.
Thanks, Andrew. And so I think just in the interest of time, I am going to move us to a vote. If board members do not agree with this proposal, you are all very welcome to vote against it. Let's add this 2022 here. So the question for the board, does the board want to add the clarification to section R402.5.1.1 per the proposal that was on the previous slide that we looked at? Option A is yes, I support this proposal. Option B is no, I do not support this proposal. Option C is to abstain. So board members in support of this proposal, option A, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you guys. I see 5 votes in support. You guys can lower your hands. If board members do not support this proposal, option B.
Sorry, Kim, I was late.
You were okay. Thank you, Carolyn. So that's 6 in support. Board members against this proposal for option B, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 1 for option B and C. Board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay. So that's 6 abstain and 6 yes. Adam, I don't know if we've ever gotten a tie with abstain before. How do we?
Well, it's not a tie because there was 1 vote against too. So it's really 6 votes in favor, 1 vote against, and 6 abstain. So that's a fail.
Okay, thank you. Yep. So that is a fail. So that's not majority. Okay. Awesome. Well, this proposal will not move forward, but thank you guys for the discussion here. I would like to try to get one more proposal in before we wrap up today. Yeah, Ron.
Could you just clarify that math again, Adam?
So yeah,
there were 13
Ron,
there were 13 board members voting. Only 6 voted in favor of it. 6 out of 13 is not a majority.
So you don't compare the votes for versus the votes against?
No, it's total number of votes in favor out of the total number of votes.
Okay.
So you would have to have at least 7 votes in favor out of 13 votes to get a majority in favor.
So you're basically saying that abstain is a vote against?
In this case, functionally, yes.
I thought I didn't think that worked that way. I thought it was the number of votes for versus the number of votes against.
David, can you weigh in on this? Because my understanding in all like formal bodies of like how you do voting, it's out of the total number of votes cast. Abstaining is a vote cast.
I think that's right, Adam. And I think when it depends on the wording of the thing you're voting on, right?
So
And in
Ron,
this case,
if people had not voted, if they had just not voted on the abstain, then that's reduces the total number of votes. But it's not just for versus against, because other than that way, abstain doesn't mean anything.
I think that's right. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. I mean, this isn't a formal vote anyway, right? These are all informal votes about what to include in the
right, and that's why I
package
guess
that'll
we're
eventually be voted
confused.
upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think we totally agree with you on the final code, right? You have to have actual majority of board members, but I
But
think
that
there's
disallows it
confusion
from.
around abstain. I think means that you don't have a strong position either way and would support either position going forward, as
So-
opposed to saying that your vote is a no.
So
That's
that,
not how I've
what would you all
understood
propose?
abstain before.
What would you all propose happen on a tie vote? Would we continue discussing this?
Well, I don't know that I wouldn't agree that abstain counts as a vote.
How about this, everybody, just to simplify things? I was not intending to vote against in my abstention, so I'm going to move mine to a yes. And now we have a majority.
I think we could recast the vote as well, because I didn't take it that way either when I said abstain. Mine was for a lack of clarity, and I think really I'd like to see the language that if we say it's a no, this language goes away, right? And then we don't have a chance to consider it further down the line. So I too would change mine.
Okay, so why don't then, just to make sure that we are uber clear, and apologies for the confusion in that voting space. Let's do a revote to make sure everybody can sort of share if they would like to keep this sort of in the game or not. And again, knowing we can work on refining that language later. So we will do a revote here. Board members in favor option A, please raise your hand. Okay, 9 votes. Option A, thank you guys. You can lower your hands. Option B, against, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Andrew, you can lower your hand. And then option C, abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, so 3 abstains. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. That's 3 abstains, 1 against, and 9 in support. So we will move this proposal forward. So sorry about the confusion with that one, guys. And yeah, we'll yeah, just apologize because that I do understand how that.
No worries. Appreciate the clarity moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so who knows if we'll get through this one, but I think it might be worth starting the discussion, because we're going to have to rapid fire through these proposals at our next meeting to make sure we get through them all. So our next proposal is for R403, 0.5.4 for the demand responsive water heating. So Kim and Elizabeth, you guys both submitted proposals here, and hopefully everybody has read them and has thought through what they would like to do here. But there were 2 proposals for the same section, and I believe the intent behind both proposals was pretty similar. So I'm going to move to the slide where both of your proposals are side by side. Kim and Elizabeth, hopefully you all had a chance to review each other's. So I'll pass it, Elizabeth, to you first, and then to Kim to share your proposals, and then we can decide as a board the direction.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I was just wanted to try to make things match between commercial and residential, because I think the intent is the same, to make lives easier for our design teams. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Kim?
That was my goal as well, and I think Elizabeth captured the language more clearly. I was going off the top of my head, so you can defer to her language if that makes things easier for everybody.
Okay, thanks, Kim. All right, comments, questions, thoughts from the board?
It's a good proposal.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Okay, any other thoughts, comments, questions? All right, well, with that, Kim, we kind of, the way we framed this question was Elizabeth's language, Kim's language, no change or abstain. So I think we can just keep that the same and vote through the different options. So
Do you want to just drop my language and make it simple so it's potentially only one vote?
yeah, I think Kim, if you agree with Elizabeth's language, I can just
I'm assuming hers is identical to what
I think we were clearly of the same mind there. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I can confirm that Elizabeth's language is identical to the commercial section.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty, because we have Kim and Elizabeth's language on that slide, and I'm not going to go and edit that slide right now, I will keep the language for option A is approving Elizabeth's proposed language. Option B is no change, and then option C is abstain. Okay, everybody, so board members in favor of option A, Elizabeth's proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 11 hands voting for option A. Thank you, guys. You can lower.
It got up to 12.
It did?
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Sorry, it's tricky to track those sometimes. Okay, any board members that would like to vote against this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 0 votes for option B. And then any board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 votes for abstain. So that proposal passes unanimously. Thanks, guys. That was easy. Okay, so now we've got next couple, and I am just going to keep cranking us through these until the end of the meeting, if you guys are okay with that. For section R403.7.1. So Elizabeth, both of these came from you. We'll start with your first one and move to the second one. So over to you.
Yeah, so this is just around our electric resistance capacity, and realized our design teams are going to need a little clarity about what does a primary source of space heating mean, and what does supplementary space heating mean in this context? Because here supplementary space heating could be either heat pump backup, it could be electric baseboard. It's something that isn't the primary heat source or the primary source of space heating. So I realized, okay, well, what does that mean? What does primary heat source mean? What does supplementary space heating mean? So I suggested we add some definitions there just to add some clarity. Meaning our primary heat source, again, just kind of using common sense here, it's the first heating source. And I would suggest we also say that the primary heat source should also be able to operate independently for the whole home. So what that means is if you have, say, electric baseboard as the only heat source of a bedroom, if that bedroom can't stay warm when the outside air temperature is 47 degrees, you're not allowed to use it. It would not count as supplementary space heating. Does that make sense to everybody? But it could be perhaps a backup heat source in the room that is also served by a heat pump, where maybe then that baseboard only kicks in when the heat pump cannot get or cannot meet loads at lower temperatures, but that there's still a primary heat source for that space. And I think that is it.
Okay, so Elizabeth, I'm making sure I hear you right, that we want to add a bit of definition to this primary heat source definition to capture that intent. So would be another sentence added onto that. Okay, so we'll just open up to board. So Carolyn, jump in.
I got a little lost on the supplemental, but you said, Elizabeth, can you repeat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started this with realizing we needed a definition for the primary heat source. So my proposal here is to define the primary heat source as the first heating source that can heat the whole home when the outside air is 47 degrees. And I chose 47 degrees because that's the AHRI rating temperature. So, it's just a good standard temperature to use. We could discuss if that's the appropriate temperature to use, but that's a really common number. So if a space cannot be kept warm without supplementary heating or backup heating, then that whatever source that is needs to be considered as the primary heat source. So again, I'll use the electric baseboard as the example. The primary heat source, whatever you define it is, must be able to heat the entire home, must be able to meet loads when the outside air temperature is 47 degrees. So you could have multiple things used. You could have multiple heat pumps, for example, you could have multiple air handlers, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're trying to avoid here, and I think what the code was trying to avoid, was having electric resistance be the first heat source for a space or the only heat source for a space. And that was why I was trying to add some clarity to the definition of, quote, primary heat source. Does that help, Carolyn?
Yeah, no, I think I got it. And that point about where the 47 degrees comes from is helpful. I do think that it's helpful to add that reference point of measurement, or at least how it's so the only other one I was thinking about is something around percent of hours at design temperature or something like that as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Kristen.
Just wanted to say thanks. I think this was needed and it adds important clarity.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Andrew.
It is a reminder, this is 40371. Could one pull up the current code language and then pull up the current state where it is in the process? Because it seems like is the supplementary space heating in the current, and it's just currently highlighted in red?
So Andrew, the text, let me annotate here. Above here, this is strike through text from the original 2024 language. So the red is the addition, the strike through is what changed.
Okay.
And then these would be new definitions that we would add to the code to define the things that were added to this upper section.
And I'll also add that the words supplementary space heating were there. They just weren't defined.
There, where? In the final
in the
version of the
2024. I mean, I can pull it up here.
No, the additional sentence about resistance heating is only allowed to be used as supplementary space heating was already added by this board, which is why it's
Correct.
not.
Yes,
red.
thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So these amendments are relative to the language we had already agreed to.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's a good point. We're clarifying the words that we had put in here with the supplementary space heating and primary source of space heating. This is already amended, I believe, from 2024, and I guess I'm trying to.
Is it already amended?
This is already amended, so that
or proposed, shall we say, proposed to be amended.
Right. Amended as the board had already agreed to through a straw poll previously. So that last sentence of the first paragraph prior to the exception was not in the 2024. The board straw polled to add that sentence, and now Elizabeth is requesting to further clarify what was in that added sentence.
I will just pull in the
yeah, I was going to suggest maybe we could look at the original 2024 language, which is basically the first sentence.
This is through. Oh no, this is not the right document.
The standard code says detached 1 to 2 family dwellings and townhouses and climate zones 4 through 8 using electric resistant space heating shall limit the total installed heating capacity of all electric resistant space heating serving the dwelling unit to not more than 2.0 kilowatts, or shall install a heat pump in the largest space that is not used as a bedroom. So that's the original language, and then we kept going after that because it needed clarity.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So this is the code language. Here are the original 2 sentences as Elizabeth shared from the 2024. And these, the sections underlined are the new additions. Brad, I'll go to you. I think I saw your hand next.
Yeah, I'll make this really quick. Just a question for the group and maybe Elizabeth. Am I reading this correctly that this would allow switch over to supplementary heat through that definition at 47 degrees outdoor temp?
I think that's actually defined, wasn't it, in the language that it's at a lower temperature that the supplemental heat has to be designed to. Don't recall the exact language already in the code. But it's
Good
lower.
Are you
question.
asking about code as in what you're calling out in that you guys created in the energy side, or what the IRC and the mechanical code calls out as far as their requirements for the temperatures that structures have to be maintained at?
I think we're talking about if it's a backup heat pump heating, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. My question, you're referring to some things that kind of contradict what you would find in the IMC and the IRC as far as what would be considered a primary heat source. Because you're starting to throw different outdoor temperatures than what the IMC and the IRC call out that would need to be maintained or have to happen on the outside to maintain a structure's temperature inside. So maybe just a suggestion. I love the fact that you're defining it. And maybe if you say like first heating source to warm the inside air or recirculating air to meet the requirements found in section 325.8 of the IRC and 309.1 of the IMC, then you're not creating intentional conflicts between the two codes.
Time slipped away from us. It is 10:59. So maybe, Adam, what I'm going to propose is that, Elizabeth, we can circle up with you just to see if there's, based on the discussion and some of the notes I heard and some of the comments in the chat, suggestions from Hope, there may be some tweaks we want to make to this, and we can bring it back to the board at Tuesday's meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm totally supportive of that. I think you all see the intent we're trying to get to.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm gonna exit out of here. It is 11, so I'll try to wrap us up while I find the slide. But our next meeting is on Tuesday of next week, Tuesday, December 17th. And now my whole screen is frozen, so apologies. I'll just go ahead and stop sharing. We are going to send meeting notes out from this meeting. Our goal is going to be by Friday of this week. And so please look out for those. Make sure you have a moment to read through those so we can vote to approve them at the start of our next meeting. We have probably upwards of 20 proposals or so to get through at our next meeting. So we may not get through them all. If we don't, Adam and I will strategize on how to get you all's input before we need to release the code draft to the public. But I would just really emphasize for any board member proposing a change that you come to next meeting prepared with your speaking points, that I will just ask that they're concise. And then for all our board members who are not proposing a change, to really have thought ahead about what questions you have if you don't know the way you're going to vote or which way you're going to vote, just so we can make sure we do as much of the voting in consensus building as we can in this meeting. I know the constant thing here is that we don't have enough time, but anyway, I think we can try and get through as much as we can next week. So that would be my ask to you all. Thank you guys for the discussion today and for moving through what we got through. We have some next steps and follow-up, and we'll bring two proposals back to you, the one for C503 and R503, and then the one we just discussed. So that's where we're headed. We'll see you next Tuesday, and have a great end of your week, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.